So, I love me a good JRPG. Me and many other gamers do. Sometimes, I just end up hating me a bad RPG when I play it though. It happens to the best of us. For the most part, that's kind of how games themselves are looked at. Some are good and people like them, or people hate their existence and want them to burn in the deepest pits of hell. But then there's that rare third ground of gaming, where the fanbase who plays it cannot agree or disagree on whether the game was a masterpiece or complete and total shit. And discussion around said topic usually leads to broken friendships or KSI giving away PS5 level riots in the streets over qualities of a title. So I figured it would be a fun idea to find some of those games and talk about why they are so divisive. That'll surely lead to fun and not at all toxic and downright threatening discussions in the comments, right? Well, anyways, that's now, yeah, I couldn't think of a better intro. Let's get into it. Yeah, so I figured I would just get the easiest and most predictable target out of the way first for this one. Call me predictable if you wish, but I really can't think of any list like this that doesn't include a game like Xenoblade 2. While there are many people who played Xenoblade 2 that praised its story and level design, the biggest divide among players was the gameplay and characters. Many people found the gameplay to be confusing and tedious, mainly due to a lack of proper tutorials that I do admit were kind of annoying. And the characters were seen as a bunch of anime tropes with horny bait designs that do nothing but detract from the entire experience. It's a tiring cycle to talk about this, especially since these kinds of arguments over this game persist even to this day. Yeah, a game that came out, like 7 years ago, still has these appearing on the fucking trending tab whenever this game is brought up, whether it's getting praised or not. An almost impressive kind of feat when you think about it, if you know it also wasn't kind of sad. Okay, so for this pick, technically if I wanted to, I could probably pick any of the Cold Steel titles from the series, and they would work just as well, as I don't really think it's a secret that Cold Steel in general is divisive among fans of Trails. But honestly, I think Cold Steel 4 is probably the single most divisive out of all four of them, so I figured it was the best choice. Now for many, Cold Steel 4 is a fantastic finale to a long-running journey that many people feel genuinely satisfied with, while others view it as a lackluster, frustrating end to an arc that caused several character arcs to nosedive and fail to commit to any sort of consequences in pretty much every area. Several moments in this game are either mocked and torn to shreds, or discussed about how deep and emotional they are. It's a cycle that I don't think either side will let go, and boy is it exhausting to talk about, as somebody who likes Cold Steel 4 but has some genuine issues with it. So, I feel like out of every single game on this list, Kingdom Hearts 3 is the one that's gotten the most turnaround on people's opinions on it, with more and more and more people coming out about how they like it. But even with this change of hearts, Kingdom Hearts 3 is still easily one of the most divisive games in the entire Square Enix library. And it really comes down to two major aspects. The first being the gameplay, with it being touted as far too easy, especially in regards to the overuse of items like attractions, which allowed you to just clear out entire rooms and popped up way too often to the point where they got way too annoying to see. And the second complaint had to do with the game's story, mainly in terms of its pacing issues, and how the conclusion for many wasn't satisfactory despite the amount of time people had to wait for the game to release. And while the Remind DLC and Critical Mode update did win some fans over, for others it was just too little too late. So I'm not super deep into the Tales of fandom. Not to say I haven't dipped my toes into it, beaten a few of the games, but like something like Star Ocean, it's a series that I don't really have a lot of experience with, but I would love to explore more of. That said, even I, with my limited Tales knowledge, know just how insanely split the fanbase was on Arise. While some were a bit torn on the game being much more serious in comparison to the titles before it, mostly in regards to the game's general lack of humor, the biggest change that divided many was its gameplay, ditching the series' traditional combat in favor of making the gameplay more focused on moving around in 3D. And while a lot of old-time Tales fans ended up loving the gameplay, a very large chunk of them didn't vibe with it, and consider Arise to be one of, if not the absolute worst the series has to offer. And from what I've gathered, the DLC they released didn't really do any favors. Okay, so real talk for this one, I probably could have put any numbered title after 10 and they would have worked for this list and it would have just been fine considering how all of those games are treated. Yes, even 14. Yet, when it comes to any of the games post 10, none have ever created the kind of divide in people that I believe 16 has been capable of. There is just a vitriolic hatred that appears in both defenders and haters when this game is brought up that it's actually kind of jaw-dropping. So why is this one so divisive? Well, to some people, Final Fantasy XVI is not a real Final Fantasy, mainly due to it being not only very light on RPG elements, but also many hate the idea of it being a full-on action title, citing the game as nothing but a DMC clone. Meanwhile, those who didn't hate it fell in love with its gameplay, story, and most of all its characters, some citing it as one of the best Final Fantasy games in the entire series. It's absolutely insane to know this game causes such an insane need to fight tooth and nail, whether you're defending or attacking it. Funny enough, I even made a few videos about that back in the day. Some I still stand by to this day. Check them out if you're interested. But for now, let's move on to the next one. While it may seem rather strange to some people to put this one on the list, considering this title is not only incredibly beloved, but also nowadays seen as the era of one of the last good Pokemon games, outside of Pokemon Sun and Moon, Fight Me. But back when these games dropped, you really couldn't find a more divisive title in the Game Freak library. And a lot of the arguments stemmed from the Pokemon themselves. While there were complaints about having to wait till after you beat the game in order to get other Pokemon from older regions, the biggest split was on the design of the new Pokemon themselves. Many old fans citing that Game Freak was running out of designs, mainly in regards to Pokemon like Trubbish or Vanillite. I think it's Vanillix? It might be Vanillite or Vanillux. I can't remember. I never really used one in my team. Anyways, despite having actual lore reasons for their design, people thought they were lame, and Game Freak was becoming creatively bankrupt. But as someone who had this game day one, let me just say I'm so glad these kinds of discussions finally started dying down, although that's pretty much due to almost every other mainline title afterwards, pretty much destroying any sort of faith Pokemon fans had in this series. So to wrap up this little video, I thought it would be kind of fun to end it on a game series that I've been getting more and more into recently. Now, Fire Emblem isn't really a stranger to divisive titles. Games like Fates specifically come to mind when thinking of them, but not even something like Fates can compare to the insane levels of discussion Fire Emblem Engage is capable of spawning. While everyone is usually in agreement on the gameplay and graphics being top-notch, the main division for talking points comes from when you bring up the characters and the story itself. The story usually gets flack for being immensely predictable and vary by the numbers, while many of the characters are lambasted for their support conversations, mostly for how they interact with the protagonist Alear, finding the constant praise and mentioning of them being the Divine Dragon to be boring and lazy, while others find the story itself to be rather fun and consider many of the characters to be rather underrated. It's one of those divides that honestly turns any discussion about the game into nothing but a rage fest on both sides, although I guess you could probably say that about pretty much every game we've talked about on this list, huh? And with that, we have reached the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching till the end if you did. This was something that I wanted to get out before I start work on my next essay video, which will be the first video I drop in November, so stay tuned for that one. Also, before I finish, I want to say something here. This video wasn't meant to insult people who liked these games or loved these games. If you liked or hate them, all the power to you. I just find these kinds of games interesting to talk about with people, as I like hearing different perspectives from time to time. And if you enjoyed what you saw here and want to see more, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button down below. We're getting closer and closer to 850, which is when the next subscriber special will be, so it'd mean a lot if you helped me out. Hit the bell for some notifications on when videos go up, and if you want to leave a comment down below on a game you think is divisive, then do that. That's all, folks. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.